I wanted to start off by congratulating you this morning. If you have been here over the last few weeks, you can now easily find the book of Habakkuk in your Bible. You remember the first Sunday that we said turn to your Bibles in Habakkuk, and you're doing the children's church flip through? You remember those days? Now you can find it. If you're new with us and you haven't been here, if you go to the book of Matthew, flip over to your left a few books, you'll find the book of Habakkuk. For most people, we don't like to hear or think about 2020 anymore, do we? Do you remember when all the shows came back and all the shows had COVID stuff in the shows? Did anybody else get bothered by that? I didn't want to see anything else. I'm over it. I don't want to watch it. I don't want you to talk about it. And I didn't like that, but I'm doing bad this morning. I'm going to talk about it this morning. Have you looked at all the significant events that took place over 2020? It's pretty incredible. You had the Australian brush fires that took place that burned 47 million acres. Animals and hundreds of people killed through those fires. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle quit the royal family. I mean, this was a way bigger deal than to some people, right? Like, people were glued to the TV, like, what is going on? They're moving to California. And the whole time I'm thinking, I don't even know what the royal family is. COVID-19 broke out. Obviously, that disrupted our lives, the longest 2 weeks of our lives, right? I apologize for that. Kobe and Gigi Bryant passed away in a helicopter crash. The stock market crashed on March 9th of 2020 because of the shutdowns. You had racial tensions and protests and riots. Even murder hornets showed up in the USA. And then you had things like the Beirut explosion that was happening across our world. It almost felt like we wanted to stick our heads underneath a pillow and just wait for it to pass over like a bad thunderstorm. I don't know if you felt like that, but I felt like that. If I could just stick my head under the pillow and I wait long enough, maybe all this chaos is just going to go away and it's going to kind of pass over like a thunderstorm. But now in 2020, 2 years later, it feels like we're on the brink of the economy collapsing. It feels like we're just one step away from World War III breaking out. Do you ever look at the world and just think like, is this ever going to be normal or calm? Is this ever going to be back to whatever normal looks like for each of us? And I think of all the times in history, this is very important for us as Christ followers to think about and to meditate on. Of all the times in history, God chose you to live in this time, in this day, in the middle of this chaos. Because we have been equipped to do whatever we need to do, whatever God has called us to do, to live in this time, to be a light in the middle of chaos, to be a light of calm and peace in the middle of what we see going on in our world. And I would imagine that Habakkuk the prophet felt much like we did in 2020, and even now, that with all the trouble that was looming for him and the people of God, that, okay, God, when is this going to end? And when is justice going to take place? And when are all the wrongs going to be righted in our world? Is this just what life is going to be like? And if you haven't been with us the last few weeks, we're in the middle of a study on the book of Habakkuk. We're in week 4, and we'll finish up next week. We're going to cover a lot of ground this week and next week as we finish our time through this study. But what's really interesting about this book is it's really just a dialogue between Habakkuk and God. So you have the prophet and you have God communicating back and forth, Habakkuk lamenting to God, like, God, there's injustice in our world. There's things around me. The people of God have turned from their ways. Are you going to look at this forever and just turn your eye to and turn it blind to the injustice that is taking place? And 2 times he laments, and 2 times God responds to his lament. The situation is that the people of Israel have been rebelling against God, as they have done from the beginning. If you read the story of the Bible, you get up to Judges, and they've done okay, right? They had some moments, and you get the Judges, and it's just back and forth, like turning from God, turning back to God, turning from God, turning back. It's a story of the Israelites, but it's also our story, isn't it? That we have had seasons in our life where we pursue God rightly, and then something captures our heart and our attention. We stop pursuing Him, we pursue other things. And so God raises up this brutal nation to bring judgment on the people of God, to turn our hearts back to Him. And so today we're looking at the second reply in chapter 2, and we're going to be chapter 2, verses 2 through 5 to start off. And then don't be scared. We'll move through some of it quickly, but we'll finish out the rest of the chapter as well. I'm not going to preach 2 hours, I promise. Let's look at verse 2. It says, "And the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so that he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by faith. Verse 5. Moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. Like death, he never has enough. He gathers for himself all nations and collects all his own peoples. Have you ever been to a restaurant where the waiter doesn't write anything down? I don't know if you are like me, but when I go to a restaurant, I'm not impressed when people don't write it down. Because I've worked in the restaurant business enough to know, like, it's better to write it down than to forget when you don't write it down. Because the whole time you're telling them your order, you got 6 people around the table. What is your mind thinking? Oh, if you mess this up, because you didn't write it down, right? That's what's going through your mind the whole time. If you just write it down, it solves a lot of problems. We write important things down in our lives, don't we? Do you remember before cell phones, how did your parents tell you that you needed to clean the house before they got home? There was a little note on a receipt or something on the counter. If you don't clean up this house before I get home, your bottom is mine. It was something nice and loving like that, wasn't it? We write things down that are important. And what we see here is God is telling Habakkuk, I want you to write these words. Let's look at verse 2. He said, Lord answered him, write the vision, make it plain on tablets so that he who run reads it. So he may run who reads it. Excuse me, that's hard to say. This is a interesting reply that God gives to Habakkuk as he's lamenting, he's crying out, when, Lord, are you coming? When are you going to provide for us and get us out of this mess? It almost seems to be an incorrect answer. Like, it seems kind of out of left field a little bit. Like, God, where are you? Why are you forgetting me? Okay, could you do me a favor? Could you write this down for me? It seems like a little bit of a stretch in a way, but this word tablets that God tells him, I want you to write it on tablets. In Hebrew, it's the same word that God uses when he tells Moses on the mountain, I want you to make tablets of stone, and I'm going to write the law down for you. It's important. Anytime the Lord throughout Scripture is, I want you to write it down, I want you to remember, these are important things for us to focus on and to meditate on. And so I want you to take these tablets, write on the law, write on it as Moses wrote on the law of God. And here it says, I want you to make it plain. And in essence, what God is saying is, I want everyone to read this. I want them all to see this message, reminding us that reminding us that this word that God is giving to Habakkuk is not just for Habakkuk, but it's for the people of God. And what do we do many times when we're facing trouble and facing difficult situations? What is right in front of our eyes is the most important thing in all the world, isn't it? When we are facing suffering, when we are facing pain, when we're facing injustice, what is happening right in front of us is the most important thing in the world. Nothing else matters, right? Because it's what's happening in our life. And this word Habakkuk is reminding him and reminding us that God is working out the bigger picture of his plan and his will for this world for us to see right here in Habakkuk. It doesn't look like what we would think it would look like. It definitely doesn't look like what Habakkuk thought it would look like. I bet in Habakkuk's mind, maybe if you could like come down with a little pillar of fire and burn just a few people up, that'd be great. But what is he doing? I'm going to raise up this brutal nation that is one of those brutal empires of the history of our world. I'm going to raise them up to bring you back to me. It's different. He says, so he who runs may read it. This is a highly debated few words in Scripture. There's really two main translations of this line. One is make it so plain that when somebody is walking by or running by, that they can see it and understand it and grasp it. It's almost in the busyness of life, if you write it so plainly in the busiest of life, as you're passing through the city, as you're passing through the town or through our village, you can read it and know, like, I need to do that. I need to obey this. That's kind of the feel the first translation. The second translation, and really where I believe what it's saying, is make it so plain that the herald can run ahead and read it. Now, if you are a note taker, I encourage you to write that word herald down. It's a very important word in the Scripture in biblical times, and really what it was is an ancient name for an announcement giver. This person would be somebody that more than likely was in pretty good shape because they're gonna run from city to city, town to town, communicating to the city. And it also had to be somebody that had a very loud projecting voice. Y'all know anybody like that? You know anybody that's got that voice? I do. He's working in Louisiana right now and probably watching a live stream. He's got that loud projecting voice, doesn't he? Like you've got to have a voice that like you're going to walk into a city and you're going to proclaim what the king has said for you. Kings would send a herald to a city to proclaim a message, the war is over, or to announce that a new king was in charge. And even kings would have heralds run ahead of them to a city or to a town to announce the king is coming, the king is coming. And so the town would get all ready and prepared. And like it's almost like workers if their boss doesn't work in the office, you know, when the boss actually shows up and all their workers are like, oh, we've got to do everything right now. It's kind of the feeling that you would get. I lean towards a second translation that means write it down so the herald may run to the city and proclaim this message so that everybody may know. By the way, we are called to be heralds as followers of Christ. You see that? You see that sermon in there? If we had time, we'd break that down a little bit. That we are called to be heralds of Christ. If we are called to proclaim the gospel, we are called to go into our workplaces, go into our third places, baseball, gymnastics, basketball, soccer, whatever it is, and we are called to proclaim, to herald the gospel, each and every one of us, which is more than just inviting somebody to church, isn't it? Hello? I know if y'all were with me there. All right, just making sure. Sounds a little bit scary, doesn't it? You're like, okay, if we could pass on through that'd be great. Verse 3, for still, the vision awaits its appointed time, and it hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It surely come. It will not delay. Do you know what every dad's worst nightmare is? Every dad's worst nightmare. It's being on a road trip and hearing a simple question over and over and over. Are we there yet? Right? Like we used to ask that as a child growing up because you really didn't know where you were. There was no GPS. There was no, like you're looking at the Ronald McNally maps, right? And you're trying to figure out where you're going. Say that name right? Is that the right one? Randall? Whatever is Ronald Randall, same thing, right? I was little. But you know, we didn't have it. Now we have apps that will actually tell you when you're going to arrive there. But you know what I do as a dad? I don't tell them. No, I'm like, you need to learn. Nope, you will get there when we get there, right? Every child needs to learn the value of patience, although I need to learn it as an adult. Just wait. Here, what this verse is saying is the trouble that Habakkuk is facing is not the end of the story. The suffering that you are about to face, this is not where the story ends. So persevere. Hold on. Wait. Now, no one likes to hear this. In our humanity, no one likes to hear like, hey, just be patient a little bit longer. And I would imagine as Habakkuk, or if you're walking through a season of pain and suffering, no one likes to hear like, you just need to wait a little bit longer. It's going to be okay. That's not very helpful, is it? That's not very good listening. If you're talking to a brother or sister in Christ and they're telling you their story and what they're walking through, you know, you don't want to go to them and say, you know what, it'll be over soon. It's not helpful. Because in the middle of it, it feels like it's lasting forever, doesn't it? But one of the guarantees of life that we have is that we're going to face trouble, confusion, chaos. It's unavoidable. And we can easily get caught up in thinking that this is just it. This is my lot in life. My call in life is to endure the pain and the suffering of the world. You can feel like that at times. But God's word, Habakkuk, should be an encouragement to you that this is not all there is. It's not just pain and suffering. It's not just waiting. It's not just being patient. This is not just your lot. Because in the end, if you look at the story of our lives, in the end, when we get to the end of our lives, we don't just have to worry about just suffering because in the end, we get Jesus. Now, that sounds like a church answer, but it is important for us as Christ followers to live with eternity in mind continually. Why? Because in light of eternity, our trouble, our present trouble is what? It's light and momentary. It may seem like a big situation in the moment, but in regards and in light of eternity and what the Lord has done for us, it's minuscule, isn't it? The writer of Hebrews uses this verse where he talks about wait. And he quotes it actually in Hebrews chapter 10. Let's look at verse 36. It'll be on the screens. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what is promised. For yet a little while, there's the quotes, yet a little while, and the coming one will come and will not delay, but my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back or are destroyed, but of those who have faith and persevere or preserve their souls. We are not of those that shrink back. We persevere. We preserve our souls. So persevere, endure, because in a little while, what Habakkuk is getting this word from the Lord, in a little while, the promise is coming. The promise is coming. This reminded me of a verse in Joshua when God was dividing up the allotments of land, getting towards the end, and they're in the promised land, they're living in the land, and they're starting to kind of set structure to what they're doing, and you get this land, and you get this land, and here's your boundaries, and make sure you stay in your boundaries, because we want to be respectful of our neighbors, to going through the civil laws of this new world that they're living in. When he gets to the end of Joshua chapter 21, look what it says. It says, not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass. That sounds like an encouraging verse, doesn't it? It is an encouraging verse. To know that the Lord is faithful, that he's faithful to his word, and his promises are going to become true. But think about this. Who was this promise given to originally? It wasn't given to Joshua originally. It was given to Moses. Lead my people into the promised land, and I'm going to take care of the land flowing with milk and honey, right? You're going to see the promised land, but because of his sin, right, he doesn't get to go into the promised land. Joshua leads them, but by the point of Joshua, by this point, Moses had been long gone in the story. But the promise still held true. Listen to what the New American Commentary says about Habakkuk. It says, God reminded Habakkuk of the certainty of the message, but without promising it on the prophet's schedule. I want to read that again. That is so good. God reminded Habakkuk of the certainty of the message, but without promising it on the prophet's schedule. Don't we many times want God to work on our time frame and in our schedule and in the little boxes that we give him? Like, God, you said that you were going to do this, and okay, here's the box that you can do it in, Lord. Here's I'm going to squeeze you into my schedule like I squeeze everything else into my schedule. And if you got about 6 months, Lord, before I start giving up on this promise. But we have to understand the Lord is working out, saying over and over in this series, the Lord is working on the long plan of his will and his plan for this world. And sometimes the promise doesn't happen in our time frame and even in our lifetime. But it does not mean that the promise goes unfulfilled, does it? As he did with Moses and it did with Joshua, he can do with us as well. Our call is to persevere through the storm. Buckle up in a sense. Let's look at verse 4. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by faith. Here, this is the crux of the entire message of the book, that the righteous shall live by faith. How do we face the storms and the chaos and the worry and the suffering and the pain that we face in this world? We do it by faith. We do it by faith. Rabbis of old would say this, that all 613 laws of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, could be summed up in one verse, in one phrase: the righteous live by faith. The righteous live by faith. How do we live a faithful life? How do we live a life that is true to God and what he has called us to do? It is not by our willpower. It's not even by just our discipline, is it? It's by faith. Notice the dichotomy here. The righteous live by faith, and then you have the puffed up. It says that, behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright with him, but the righteous live by faith. They're completely opposed to each other, which should be a warning for us as Christ followers, that pride and being puffed up in our own willpower and strength is completely opposed to the life that God has called us to. So when we live our lives in this world, we don't live our lives with pride, but live it with humility. We live it with trust in the one that is providing every single thing for us, don't we? which is hard for us to do. If all of our needs are met and we don't have any outstanding thing that is like over our heads, it's easy to live a life without faith. It can be easy to get caught up in that. But he's saying, no, being prideful is opposed to the Lord. I want you to live by faith. Remember Habakkuk's lament. Will the sinful go unpunished? Will the unrighteous overtake the righteous? God's answer is clear as it can be. The one whose life is puffed up in pride and arrogance will die, the unrighteous. And in contrast, the righteous will live by faith. When chaos hits our life, what is our natural response? When chaos hits our life, what is our natural response? When you get a diagnosis, when you get a call from the doctor, when you lose somebody close to you, when something unexpected happens in your life, what is our natural response, and what is your natural response? I know what mine is. Mine's to go into control mode. I'm going to fix it. I'm a fixer, right? This has been something that Lindsay and I have had to learn really big in our marriages. Sometimes she just wants to vent, and I don't do good with just venting. I want to fix it. I'm like, okay, well, we need to call this person, and we need to do that, and we need to set up this, and we're going to fix it all right now. And any married people know that's not how you do it, right? Any married people? No? All right, just making sure. If not, I'm trying to help the counseling load here. When the chaos hits our life, what is our natural response? Do we flex the muscle of faith, or do we flex the muscle of willpower? Or maybe we could call it pride. Think about all the things that we work and we strive for so hard that puff us up. Intellectual achievement, whether it be degrees or just walking around in life projecting your bright brain on everybody around you, that you know everything, that right? There's something about knowledge that puffs up. Scriptures warn that. There's nothing wrong with knowledge. We should grow. We should know things. We should develop our brain and continually read and study and all those things. That's great. But are we reading and studying so that we can puff up and so we can project onto others that we're smarter than everybody else? Intellectual achievement, financial success. What would be your drive and your purpose for financial success? There's nothing wrong with money. There's nothing wrong with resources. You can have as much money as you want, but what is your driving factor for financial success? It's a question we have to ask ourselves. Is it so that we can feel important? Is it so that we can feel like if I could just get a little bit more, then some of my problems will go away. I'll be a little bit more self-reliant. A third one, status. If I could just not feel like a bottom feeder in this world, if people could just look at me as important. You see how all of these things, if we are not careful, what will they do? They will puff us up, and they become something we seek after, we drive after. The only sure road in the chaos of this life that we have is faith in God. You can be the smartest person in the world. You can have all the knowledge in the world. And I love being around intellectual people because I strive to be like them. I want to be able to recall things from memory as easy as they do. Financial success, yes, everybody wants to be able to pay their bills and prepare for the future. All those things, status, there's something inside of us, human nature, that says, I want to feel important and cared for and loved. All those things, yes, they don't have to be bad, but they're very unstable ground. You build your life on success. You build your life on status. You build your life on knowledge. You'll quickly learn that you're building your life on unstable ground. This word faith, where he uses in this verse, he says that the righteous shall live by faith. This Hebrew word, emunah. It carries a meaning of steadfastness or firmness. I want you to think about this for a moment. Steadfastness or firmness, I'm not moving, that I'm firm in my faith. No matter what the storm looks like around me, I'm firm, I'm steadfast. So here's the question that I keep asking. What muscle are you flexing, faith or pride? Faith or pride? Here's the main idea, given it a little bit later this morning. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. When the chaos of life surrounds us, faith in our steady God grounds us. In the chaos of life surrounds us, faith in our steady God grounds us. Now, I am no expert at working out, as you may be able to tell. But I do know this. If you go to the gym and you decide, I'm going to do the same workout every single day, and I'm going to use the same weights, and I'm going to do the same exercise every single day, your whatever muscle you were working out will grow for a little bit. It'll start to grow, and you'll like guys are funny because we work out once and we stand in the mirror. We're like, oh, I think I see some results. That's what guys do every time. But your muscle may grow a little bit, but what will happen over time if you do the same workout, same weight, same reps, all the things, your muscle will eventually get used to the stress that you have put it under, and it will say, I no longer have to grow for me to be able to lift this anymore. But if you look at people that do professional bodybuilding, or people that are power lifters, they are continually changing up their routine, their weights, their reps, all that, because what it does is it shouts to the muscle that if I don't grow, I can't lift this. There's a stretching and a pulling. And if you ever been somebody, all the workout people, they call it the pump, right? Like they're just like, ooh, I got the pump, and they're putting it on Instagram, and they're all excited because they're just like their veins popping out, and you're like, oh, okay, you just took some pre-workout. But sorry, really judgmental. I apologize for anybody that does that. But right, they're all excited and they do all. But listen, the reality is your muscles, if you are working them out properly, your muscles are tearing and being torn and stretched inside your body, and they grow by growing back together, fusing back together, growing stronger. And I wonder if the Lord will allow us sometimes to go through pain and suffering so that our muscle of faith will grow stronger. That without pain and suffering, without being stretched and pulled and having to do some heavy lifting spiritually with our faith, would we not be so reliant on pride and our own self-will and power? Would we not be willing to just buy into the lie that I'm a self-made man and I can do it on my own? The pull your bootstraps up kind of theology that we have in our world, and specifically in America, like I can do it on my own because I'm good enough. I can make it happen. Do we buy into that, or do we say, in the middle of the chaos, I'm going to be firm, I'm going to be steadfast in my faith because I know in who my faith rests? It feels backwards, doesn't it? It feels completely backwards to think that in the middle of suffering and pain that I'm supposed to just sit still and be firm and trust in the Lord. Like I feel like I'm drowning, but I'm supposed to just float here. Like how is this supposed to work? But this is what we call the upside down kingdom of the Lord. Many times the kingdom of God will call us to do things that feel counter to our personal nature, our human nature. It will feel different than what the world calls us to do. Be firm, be steadfast in your faith in the middle of the chaos. Verse 5, we start to see this response to Habakkuk's request. And Babylon is going to be dealt with, this brutal nation. Verse 5, God says this, moreover, wine is a traitor. An arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol. He gathers for himself all nations and collects all his own peoples. Wine here being a metaphor. Depending on how you grew up, this may shock you, but I don't think that drinking alcohol is a sin. I think drunkenness is a sin. And we have to be very clear, and sometimes that line calls us not to drink because there are people around us that are struggling with alcohol. So there is a fine line there. But this right here is a metaphor. And he's saying this, that the Babylonians are drunk on their own pride. The Babylonians have been drinking of themselves for so long, they don't even realize how prideful they are. And much like drunkenness can lead you and I to shame, the Babylonians were drunk on their pride, and it was going to lead them to shame. Like the alcoholic that can never have enough to drink, the Babylonians could never have enough plunder, never enough land, never enough people. They were never satisfied, and it blinded them. So yes, the Babylonians, although powerful, how they lived stands in stark contrast to the one that lives in faith. They needed more. They desired more. But the one that lives by faith lives in contentment, lives in trust in the Lord. It was a challenge thousands of years ago, and it's still a challenge today, right? To live in contentment. There's always something new. Like, let's talk about our phones for a second, right? What does Apple do so well? Make you buy a new phone. That's right. They're the only company that will update like one little thing about the camera, and you're like, I've got to have it. It's important. It's like I will put myself in monthly stress just so that I can get the new iPhone, right? There's something about like that we pursue things that others have. You buy a new vehicle, guess what? There's a new one coming out in just a couple of months that you're going to see, and you're like, oh, I should have waited 6 months, right? There's always something like that. The life of faith is a life of contentment. It's a challenge. And so now we're going to get to the full response of how God's going to deal with the Babylonians. And God speaks in these 5 woes. 5 woes. This is not woe like you're riding a horse and you're like, whoa, like slow down. This is like, whoa, you're about to get judgment dropped on your head. Like, you better pay attention, Babylon, because this is what's going to take place to you. So we're going to move through these pretty quickly. Let's look at verse 6. Verse 6 through 8. And he says this, shall not all these take up their taunt against him, with scoffing and riddles for him, and say, woe to him who heaps up what is not his own, for how long? And loads himself with pledges. Will not your debtors suddenly arise, and those awake with who will make you tremble, and then you will be a spoil for them? Verse 8. Because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you, for the blood of man and violence to the earth, to the cities, and to all who dwell in them. Basically, what he's saying is those who build their lives on the evil of bloodshed and greed, God says it's going to come back on your head. He's specifically talking to Babylon here, but there's stuff for us to learn in this too, isn't it? This is in the South, in the Bible Belt, we use a Bible phrase, not really in like a Bible way, but we say this like, you reap what you sow. Yes, like we do reap what we sow, but we use it in a condescending sense, don't we? Like something bad happens to us, well, reap what you sow. Right? You know, it's almost like another version of the bless you, honey. Like, you know, we do in the South, oh, bless you, honey, you're crazy. All right. Like that we have those phrases in the South, and it's like you reap what you sow. It's kind of what we feel. Like they're sowing injustice. They're building their nation off the bloodshed and off of the backs of other people in an awful way. And God says, Babylon, you're not going to go unpunished. Let's look at the second woe, verse 9. Woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to set his nest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. You have devised shame for your house by cutting off many peoples. You have forfeited your life, for the stone will cry out from the wall, and the beam from the woodwork respond. I want you to think about this for a moment. How many dynasties in the history of our world no longer exist? Think about the Persian Empire. Right? You read stories in history books, and you're like, wow, like they seem so powerful, so strong. You have the Han Dynasty, you have the Ottoman Empire, all these things that we look at and we read about, and you're like, wow, it seemed like they were taking over the earth. They're controlling everything. But now what are they? They're all gone. Their cities, their buildings, at best, they're just ruins. People pay really good money to travel the world and see the ruins of history. And God tells Habakkuk, those who build this way, that build their life with injustice, their cities are going to crumble. They are going to wear out. So much so that what it says in the last verse 10 or verse 11, it says, the stones and the beam are going to cry out. You may seem like they may seem like they're powerful. They may seem like they've got everything. They've got all the resources and all the time and all the people and all the buildings. But even their buildings are going to suffer because of their injustice. The third one, verse 12, woe to him who builds a town with blood and founds a city on iniquity. Behold, it is not from the Lord that the Lord of hosts that peoples labor merely for fire, and nations weary themselves for nothing. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Saying those who build like this, they will build for nothing. They will weary themselves out. They will live exhausted. Yes, the earth is going to be filled with evil, with people that build their careers, their companies, and their nations off the backs of others unjustly. But what does he say? In the end, it is not the unjust that are going to get the glory. Who is going to get the glory? It is the Lord. The Lord's glory is going to cover the face of the waters of the sea. Let's look again, verse 15. I told you we're moving quick through this. Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink. You pour out your wrath and you make them drunk in order to gaze at their nakedness. You will have your fill of shame instead of glory. Drink yourself and show your uncircumcision. The cup is the Lord's right hand. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter shame will come upon your glory. The violence done to Lebanon will overwhelm you, and the destruction of the beasts that terrified them. For the blood of man and violence to the earth, to cities, and to all who dwell in them. And he's saying, Babylon, you may fill up your neighbor's cup, you may fill up your own cup, and you may drink all that you want, but you just need to know that the Lord's cup of wrath is coming for you. I think back to Habakkuk's laments, and he's saying, Lord, where are you? What are you doing? How can you see all the injustice taking place and you ignore it? And God's response is pretty clear, isn't it? The unjust are not going to go unpunished in our world. Of history past and future, the unjust are not going to go unpunished by the Lord. We see what's going on in Ukraine right now and war crimes that are taking place. Guess what? Eventually, at one time, in one place, the Lord is going to bring justice on the earth. There are things that happen all across our globe that we can shake our heads at and think, how can this happen? How can this happen? But the injustice of this world, listen, I want you to listen to this. God's justice will always overpower the injustice of the wicked. God's justice will always overpower the injustice of the wicked. It seems dark. It seems like we're lost without hope. At times, as we look into this world, we know as followers of Christ, we're not without hope. Because we have a faith and a steadfastness in our life that we look at and we say, I'm trusting in the one that is holding the very foundations of this world. For someone that's been hurt, for someone that's been abused, and you feel like justice hasn't taken place to the abuser, as a follower of Yahweh, you just need to know that justice is going to take place fully and completely. It's going to take place fully and completely. It may not be on our time, but it's going to come. Let's look at verse 18. Al and Josh, y'all can come. In the ancient world, idol worship was very common. We'll see that here in verse 18. It's what profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? A metal image, a teacher of lies, for its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes speechless idols. Idol worship was huge in that day. Still in some countries today, you'll see idol worship, but in our time, it looks different. Really, it's any created thing that captures our heart and attention in a way that the Lord should be capturing our heart and our attention. Success, it could be sports, it could be even fitness. The people that I was making fun of, those things can become idols, right? All those things in our life that capture our heart, it should be a warning to us that we as followers of Christ should be ruthlessly cutting down the idols that are in our lives. And many times, I don't think we even pay attention or stop to ask, like, hey, is this even an idol for me? Do we have any idols that are coming up in our life? What does it profit an idol when its maker has shaped it, its metal image? Verse 19, the last woe. Woe to him who says to a wooden thing, awake, or to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath in it at all. This entire woe, this last woe, the fifth woe, is in third person, which shows the sorrow of the one that is crying out to the little g God, which can neither stand nor hear. Because when God's justice comes and the people that do not follow Yahweh, do not follow the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, they're going to cry out, and all the idols that they've created in their life will be speechless and unable to respond. The injustices of our world will be dealt with. It may not be in our time frame, but it's going to be dealt with. And so the comfort for Habakkuk is Babylon was going to be dealt with. As he is looking at impending doom coming on the people of Judah at this time, Like, where are you, God? How is this going to take place? God reminds him in the middle of it, before it really even starts. And he's like, listen, Babylon is going to be dealt with. Justice is going to take place. And I want you to hear that so clearly. Habakkuk is what he's getting through to Habakkuk in his words here. And what we know from history is that the entire nation of Babylon, as big and strong and powerful as they were, only lasted less than 100 years. Less than 100 years. The Lord raises them up. The Lord brings them down. And justice will be dealt with. We may not like the time frame for our suffering, but the encouragement for us this morning is that it's not the end of the story. Your suffering and your pain is not the end of the story. Let's look at verse 20 as we close. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. I love how this chapter ends. The Lord is in his holy temple. All the chaos going around us, yet we can trust that God is still on his throne. All the suffering and the pain that we see in our life, we can be steady and we can be still and silent before the Lord and say, I trust in you. My faith is in you. What I see right now, it feels conflicting to what I know, but I'm going to be steady and still in the middle of the chaos. I'm going to put my trust in you, knowing that you're faithful, God. There's a big difference here. How we kind of see faith as this distant, far out thing. This is personal. And it says, with all this chaos, that it reminds us that the Lord is not surprised, the Lord is not scared. It says that he's sitting in his temple. As we're running around the world and we're fretting and we're worried and we're stressed out, and he says, I'm just going to sit. Why? Because I hold the world in my hands. My plan is unfolding before our very eyes, before your very eyes, Habakkuk. This comfort that we have is only for those that live by faith. Remember, Habakkuk, he was making these demands of God and lamenting, like, God, where are you? When will you respond? How can you let injustice go on? And what does God say? He says, let the earth keep silence before me. He's not saying don't communicate with him, and he's not saying don't lament. I want you to listen to what scholar K.L. Barker says this. It won't be on the screen, but he says, now the prophet hushes himself and all the world, willing to let God act in God's time and willing to wait for God to open his mouth when he chooses. He hushes himself before the Lord and before the world. He pauses to meditate on the truth that God is on his throne and he is in control and he's going to move when he decides. When the chaos of life surrounds us, faith in our steady God will ground us. I want us to close our time together this morning by sitting in silence for a moment. And that may be strange to some or weird to some, but I want us to do what the Lord calls Habakkuk to do. That among the chaos, I want you to sit in silence before the Lord. Maybe for you, it's just to hear the voice of the Lord reminding you that he's there. Maybe for you, it's to quiet your soul among the storm you're facing and remind yourself that although this storm feels big, although this storm feels nasty and hard to face, I need to quiet my soul because the Lord is still on his throne. And my faith is one that's sitting even though there's chaos around us. The one that lives by faith can face the storms, see the storm, be in the middle of the storm, and be in silence because they know the God that is in control of the storm. So for just a moment, Al's gonna play for just a moment. And I want us to sit in silence as much as possible and just let the Spirit of God speak to your heart this morning. To be silenced before the Lord, knowing that he's faithful, that he's good, and that he's still on his throne.